Hey there, Jake here from CVP. Today we are taking a look at a camera I've been waiting to get my hands on for a while, the Blackmagic URSA Cine 17K 65mm. Blackmagic have been creating unique, affordable solutions for filmmakers for years now, and the 17K, while still being expensive to some, is trying to make digital 65mm motion acquisition more accessible. So in today's video, I want to talk through a shoot that we managed to get the 17K onto, dive deep into how this camera performs, and explore the world of 65mm filmmaking. Let's get into it. We reviewed the Ursa Cine 12K late in 2024, and we were incredibly impressed with its performance and feature set considering its incredibly aggressive price. There's a lot of information in that video that also applies to the 17K, which we aren't going to talk about today. So I suggest checking that video out after you watch this one if you want to know these cameras inside out. However, we are going to cover all of the key features and reasons you may want to use the 17K over the 12K. We've had our 17K in the studio for a few weeks now, and I've managed to get it onto several different shoots that we had planned. So we've got a really nice mix of footage to show you. On one of these shoots we had two 17Ks, a 12K, a bunch of new exciting lenses from Sigma, IBE and Cooke, and a great crew to help capture some controlled creative examples. We also managed to film some controlled food examples with the Alexa 35 Extreme, and take it down to the Lockswood Joust, which we filmed a couple of years back. A huge thank you to everyone who let us film with them. Let's take a look at some of our favourite images we've managed to capture with this camera. The camera is pretty much identical to use as the Ursa Cine 12K, so it's incredibly easy to use and navigate, but also comes with the same drawbacks. It's a pretty big lump of a camera, which does mean you need the correct large support equipment set around it. However, if you compare the size of it to film 65mm cameras, it's very small in comparison. It also does kick out quite a bit of heat, but there's a lot of processing happening in the camera, so this is hardly surprising. Image quality wise, it looks really good. Colours look really nice, and the aesthetic of a sensor this wide with the right lenses really is quite special. We managed to use a range of the test lenses that we took with us, and they all looked nice in their own unique way. The Pancro 65s provided that quintessential Pancro look. It's great that you now have an option for a Pancro at 65mm, full frame and Super 35. The image this combination captured is lovely. They resolve well in the centre wide open, but fall off nicely towards the corners of frame. Using a faster lens like the Sigma ISOs, which some focal lengths do cover the 65mm, can result in some very shallow depth of field imagery. Some of the imagery we captured with this combination wide open, it almost looks like the subjects are popping off of the background like a green screen. Anyway, let's get into the nitty-gritty details of the camera. The star of the show in the 17K is obviously the unique sensor sitting inside of it. The 17K's massive sensor has a resolution of 17,520 by 8,040 and a physical size of 50.81 by 23.32 millimeters in its 2.2:1 open gate mode, giving it a pixel pitch of roughly 2.9 microns. which is pretty small compared to other high-resolution cinema cameras. So it's a similar height to a full-frame sensor, but it's 15.17mm wider than the Cine 12K. Compared to your standard Super 35 sensor, like the Alexa Mini for example, the 17K is 1.79 times wider, but only 1.28 times taller. It looks like Blackmagic are stitching 3 sensors together here to achieve this width, but during our time testing and shooting with the camera, we didn't run into any artifacts. But it's good to know in case you do. The 2.2:1 open gate will be good for those wanting to deliver in 2:3:9:1 or even 2:1, as you don't have to crop too much to get to those ratios. Blackmagic have clearly designed this sensor around being close to the size of 65mm 5x film, which has a capture area of roughly 52.15 by 23.07mm. This is a touch wider than the 17K sensor, but not quite as tall. There are a few different 65mm standards, such as Super Panavision 70, which used spherical lenses, and Ultra Panavision 70, which used anamorphic lenses to deliver a very wide 2.76:1 aspect ratio. Most recently, Ryan Coogler's Cine's utilised Ultra Panavision 70 combined with IMAX to capture some really beautiful imagery, which was projected a lot in the 2.76:1 standard as well as IMAX formats. Kodak have made a really awesome video with him talking through why he chose to shoot like this, which I highly recommend checking out. We managed to chuck a few of the Viltrox Epic 1.33x anamorphic lenses on the 17K, as some of them cover the 17K in open gate. Both the 50 and 75mm cover, but the 35mm does not. These paired with the 17K in 2.2:1 result in a 2.93:1 aspect ratio when de-squeezed, which does require slight trimming to get down to the 2.76:1 aspect ratio of Ultra Panavision 70. 2.76:1 is a seriously wide aspect ratio, but it's undeniable that it can result in some really unique compositional choices and imagery. So, putting sensor design aside, what are the reasons to shoot with a larger sensor? Well, let's go through some basics first. First off, a lens's focal length doesn't change regardless of what camera you put it onto. A 50mm lens is a 50mm lens across a Super 35, full frame and 65mm camera. What is changing is the portion of the image circle that you are seeing, and this changes your field of view. This means that with 65mm you can use longer focal length lenses and achieve similar fields of views compared to smaller formats. Because of this, it means that more often than not you are using lenses that have less distortion compared to wider lenses and also get shallower depth of field at equivalent apertures. So if we take the width of the 12K and the 17K, we can calculate that the 12K has a rough crop factor of 1.426 times compared to the 17K, or if you'd rather a point of reference from the 12K's full frame width, the 17K is 0.7 times wider than it. This means that to get roughly the equivalent field of view of a 50mm on the 17K, we would need to use a 35mm on the 12K. When it comes to matching depth of field, let's say we have a 50mm at f2 on the 17K. You would need to use a 35mm lens at f1.4 to get roughly the same field of view and depth of field. f1.4 full frame sets are pretty common to find nowadays, and there are even some faster f1 lenses available as well. If we used a 50mm f1.4 lens that can cover the 17K, we would need to use a 35mm f1 on the 12K to match it. f1.4 65mm coverage lenses are pretty hard to find currently, but we did manage to use a couple of Sigma's ISO primes that are T1.3 on the 17K, and some of them can cover the full open gate as well. This resulted in some insanely shallow depth of field imagery. I really do feel for focus pullers who are going to have to deal with just how narrow the depth of field is here, but also how well the camera resolves. It's going to make missed sharps or marks even more noticeable. The other benefit of being able to use longer focal length lenses while achieving comparable field of views to smaller sensors is that most standard to tele lenses are often better at controlling aberrations and most distinctly distortion. So what we need is more 65mm lenses that are around the f1.4 mark to really get the most out of the 17K. And this leads us on quite nicely. Let's talk about what to consider and what options you have to choose from when it comes to lenses. Lensing is definitely one of the more challenging things you have to consider when it comes to using a 65mm format camera. The 17K comes with both PL and LPL out of the box as standard, but separate EF and Hasselblad HC mounts are available for it as well. The EF is the same that comes with the 12K, which was helpful as I had a 645 to EF adapter at home, which allowed us to get a few Mamiya Secor C lenses onto the 17K to capture some test imagery. I did wonder if the EF mount was going to cut the image circle, but fortunately it doesn't, which is good. Currently there aren't too many consumer available cinema lenses on the market that have the massive 55.91mm image circle needed to cover the open-gate 2.2:1 format. There are a bunch of rental lenses that will cover this from the likes of Panavision, Hawk and Arri, but when it comes to lenses that you can actually buy, there are really only a few sets. Cooke have their Pancro 65i, Lights have their Thalia, Eyeglass have their Soviet medium format set, Tribe 7 have their Azana lenses, Duolens have teased their Cambrian series, and TLS are rehousing the Mamiya Secor C stills lenses, which have become very popular to use with large format cinema cameras. Of course, you have the option to also buy photography medium format lenses, like those from Mamiya and Hasselblad, and use them in their original housing, or even get them rehoused, as we just mentioned. And of course, the last option, you could potentially use other stills or cine lenses that have image circles that go far beyond their rated full frame design. We have our fantastic lens tool online, but unfortunately the camera we use to capture our images has a physical size of 49.105 by 36.829mm. That means that it doesn't have quite the width that the Ursa Cine 17K does, which is actually 1.7mm wider than our capture camera. But the capture camera sensor is much taller. This means we've had to add a simulated image circle mode, which uses the same diagonal as the 17K 2.2:1 format, but with more height. So you'll see a slight difference when using lenses on an actual 17K, but this is a good enough starting point of reference, and it's interesting seeing what full frame glass covers this wide of a sensor. We have so many lenses on there now, so it's definitely worth checking out if you want to see if a set of lenses you've got your eye on are going to cover a given camera format. Link to that is in the description. One thing to think about though is this tool is just for pure illumination, not performance. So this is something worth considering. And if you want to fully understand how a lens performs, I would suggest testing those lenses on a projector or a larger format camera before committing to them for a production. So when choosing what lenses you want to use on the 17K, I'd break it down into two types. Ones that have been designed to be used with an imager this size or larger, and then lenses that haven't been designed for sensors this size, but may still cover the full width of the sensor. We've already spoken about lenses that are designed for 65mm, so let's talk through what to consider if you want to try and use lenses that may cover this sensor, but aren't necessarily designed for it. What you deem as acceptable illumination fall-off and performance will really come down to your personal preference and the production you are using it on. When you are using a lens past its rated image circle, you are potentially seeing portions of a lens's image circle the lens manufacturer didn't expect you to see. This means that you can experience a few different things. First off, coverage changes throughout your focus and t-stop range. So when using a lens like this beyond the image circle, you can often see illumination change when focusing, so this is something definitely worth testing before getting onto set. Overall, performance will also be something that changes from lens to lens, but often you will see a drop in performance towards the very corners of a lens's image circle. This could mean a reduction in resolving power, an increase in chromatic aberration or spherical aberration, and even color shifts. It can also change how your outer focus elements look as well, as you can experience more pupil occlusion towards these extremes. Lens flares can also change quite a bit, and I have often seen more internal reflection towards the corners. So yeah, if you're going to try putting lenses on this camera that aren't designed for 65mm, it's definitely worth checking their performance during your prep, as you may love or hate what you see with this larger sensor. We've managed to use a few full-frame lenses with this camera, and have had mixed results, but there are definitely some out there that will cover the whole sensor, and even more that will in the camera's 2:1 mode. If your favourite cinema lens doesn't cover the 65mm, you could also potentially use it with an expander, like we mentioned earlier. These behave similarly to teleconverters, so they work the opposite way as a focal reducer. This will increase your lens's focal length, expand your image circle up, and decrease your exposure. They can also potentially add optical artifacts depending on the adapter you choose, but it can be a good way to use your smaller image circle lenses on this larger sensor. Another thing worth considering when looking at lenses is how well they resolve. If you want to take advantage of the resolution this camera can capture, when we look at what lenses can resolve, we use line pairs per millimeter, which is what you are reading when looking at an MTF chart, for example. So we did some maths to figure out the line pairs per millimeter required to not be bottlenecking the performance of the sensor, and this works out to be theoretically around 172. To put that into perspective, our Crozier projector's reticle only goes up to 200 line pairs per millimeter, which most modern optics will be able to manage in the center of their image circle, with some even managing this wide open across their image circle. This is much more reasonable than the 227 line pairs per millimeter the original 12K needed theoretically. So if you want to be getting the absolute most resolving power out of this 17K sensor, you'll need to make sure you are using lenses that can resolve at least this, which, to be fair, in the center is quite a few. However, if you want corner-to-corner performance, I would be looking at using lenses like our trusty Zeiss Otus or Supremes, the Lights Primes, Arri's Signature series and Enzo Primes, or Fujinon's Premister series of zooms. Another thing worth thinking about if you want to get the absolute most out of the sensor is diffraction, as you'll run into it quite soon because of how small the pixels are on this camera. And from our maths, it's basically from T5.6 onwards you're going to start running into issues. So if you want the absolute most, make sure you stay below this or not far past it. Another really interesting feature present in both the Ursa Cine cameras is the right-hand side focus pulling menu. While using PL or LPL lenses that have Cook eye data, and even with some EF lenses, the camera will be able to read the movement of the focus, iris, and zoom rings through the connections in the lens mount. It will feed out this information on the monitor on the side, and you can even add an array of focus marks along the scale by hitting the plus button. You can then hold the mark down to change the color of it, delete it, or reset all of your focus points. If your lens has eye data, but it doesn't output the focus and iris range data, you can encode this manually and the camera will remember when you put that lens back onto it again. Combine that with the good punch-in tool and an array of focusing tools, and I can see people using this feature. And you can also output this data via the EVF, other LCD, and SDIs, which means if an AT does want to use a larger monitor for focus pulling or be away from the camera, you can still get this data. Being able to capture eye data is of course also really handy for post as well. When we used the 17K on set recently, when paired with the Sigma iZooms, which have eye data, we managed to feed these marks out to our AC. I was quite impressed the iZooms did this given how new they are, but the marks were really accurate, which was great to see. The Cine 17K features an OLPF specifically designed for it. An OLPF, also known as an anti-aliasing filter, is used on a lot of high-end cinema cameras to counter moire. This camera is giving you a similar level of resolving power to the 12K, but just obviously with the extra width tagged on. Here's a visualization comparing 12K on the 17K and then 17K open gate. I've used a lens swap to match the horizontal field of view between the two. On an 8K timeline, we can see a clear resolution improvement between the 12 and 17K, which isn't too surprising. Just like the 12K, you don't need to shoot at 17K while still taking advantage of the full sensor size and resolution. You have the option to shoot 17K, 8K, or 4K while still using the same amount of the sensor's dimensions. And partially thanks to the sensor's symmetrical design, the camera is able to downsample the sensor instead of binning data. You also have the option to shoot in 12K, which basically turns the 17K into a 12K with very similar formats, including 3x2. Honestly, I think Blackmagic shouldn't have actually included the resolution in the branding of these cameras. I think the idea of shooting 12 or 17K does put some people off using these cameras, even though you don't need to shoot at these higher resolutions, and you can still get great results with these cameras in their lower resolution modes. This is thanks to the symmetrical sensor design paired with B-RAW, which allows Blackmagic to downsample in camera while also giving you some other benefits as well. Just like the 12K, you can only record in Blackmagic RAW, and the camera will automatically record 1080p, H.264, 8-bit 420 proxies as well. B-RAW is a great format to work with in post, and is part of the magic of this camera system. You can choose from two different versions of B-RAW, constant bitrate and constant quality, which varies the bitrate with 4 different compression ratios and rates for each. With this scaling, it also changes the data rate, which means if you don't want to shoot at 17K because of the huge data rates, you can lower your resolution and still get great detailed images and save on storage. Doing this in camera over in post will still give you some of the benefits of downsampling, but results will be better recording in 17K and downsampling in post. On 4K timelines, this is less noticeable, but when viewing the 17K footage on an 8K timeline, you can see a clear detail difference between this in-camera downsampled footage and the full 17K image. However, when you go down in resolution, you do get improved sensor readout speeds and higher frame rate options, which is great. And again, Blackmagic can achieve this because of the symmetrical sensor design. With the sensor being as large as it is, it should have a slow readout time, right? Well, actually, no, not really. Blackmagic actually provide readout speeds on a forum post of all of their cameras, which is super useful, and they're actually accurate numbers. However, we did run our own tests just to double check theirs. In its full 17K open gate mode, it has a readout speed of roughly 16.5 milliseconds. And thanks to its sensor design, as you drop the resolution, the readout speed improves without a sacrifice to field of view. Here's a table for the rest of the modes. These are some very good numbers given the size and resolution of this sensor. And if you require some faster speeds than OpenGate, it's great you have the option to just lower your resolution down and get single-digit performance, which is really impressive. Compared to the 12K, the 17K has slightly limited high frame rate options, but it can still capture some impressive maximums. In 17K 2.2:1 OpenGate, you can go up to 60 frames. In 12K 2.4:1 crop, you can go up to 90. In 8K 2.2:1, you can capture up to 100. And in 8K or 4K 2.4:1, you can go all the way up to 170 frames per second. These aren't as fast as the 12K, but will be plenty for most productions, and just like the 12K, the image quality at these higher frame rates is excellent. Talking about frame rates, did you know that you can over and under crank your frame rate with Blackmagic cameras while recording? This is a pretty cool feature, which I didn't know these cameras could do until I randomly stumbled on it during a recent shoot. There have been a few cinema cameras that could do this in the past, but not too many. Being able to do this in camera can make for some interesting in-camera effects. To do this, you have to be in off-speed recording. You can then just use the arrows, not the slider, to adjust your frames, even when you're recording. This will conform to whatever base you have your camera set to. One thing worth noting with the 17K is that it doesn't have built-in NDs, whereas the 12K does. Given the size of the sensor, this isn't too surprising, but it is something I would have loved to have seen in this camera. To really take advantage of that 65mm look, you'll need to make sure you have an external ND solution. Weirdly, the 17K still has the plus and minus buttons for controlling the NDs on the 12K. I understand this is probably to save on cost, but it would have been nice to have differently labelled buttons here. Thankfully though, you can rebind these in the menu to do a range of different functions. Anyway, let's quickly take a look at how the 17K handles IR pollution. For this, we grabbed our trusty Arri Blonde and Polar Pro variable ND and used aperture on our lens to keep exposure consistent throughout the ND stops. Going from clear to the maximum stops of ND, we can see a minor purple shift at 5 stops, but it's very well controlled overall. We ran some detailed latitude comparisons for our Cine 12K review, and the 17K should perform very similarly given that it's essentially a wider version of the 12K. But let's double check. For these tests, we are using the Nissi Athena 85mm across both cameras, as it's got a decent sized image circle with only a tiny amount of hard cutting in the corners, and its t1.9 aperture will come in handy for these tests. Here's a full breakdown of our methodology. Starting with over, we can see that the 17K performs well up to about 4 stops, with no real clipping, even with highlight recovery off. When we hit 4 1/3 stops, we can see Sam's skin and the chart starting to clip, but enabling highlight recovery fixes this. From here, highlight recovery tries to save Sam's skin and the chart from clipping, but the reconstructed detail is a bit digital looking. Compared to the 12K, they pretty much perform identically here, which is good to see. As we go through the underexposure stops, we can see that the 17K's noise is much finer if we compare the images at the same width. This isn't surprising given the increase in resolution. Both cameras don't handle the deeper underexposed stops amazingly. I'd say it's usable down to -3, and past this the chroma noise gets pretty intense. But this is with no noise reduction, so this image can definitely be improved. The 17K uses the same media modules from the 12K. This means you can use the included 8TB module, an optional 16TB one, or the CF Express Type B module. The dedicated media modules will give you the best, most reliable performance. However, offloading them is still more challenging than it should be. You can either connect to the camera via the 10G Ethernet on the back, or use the Blackmagic Media Dock, which can take up to 3 modules but also only uses 10G just like the camera, so you are limited in regard to offload speed. Blackmagic really need to make a nice, fast, single bay Thunderbolt reader for faster and simpler offloads. You can get around this though by using the optional CF Express Type B module, but this opens up its own set of problems, mainly around the difference in sustained write speeds between different cards, and how much data you record in the higher resolutions. Blackmagic have a great data rate tool on their website where you can see what kind of data rates you need for the higher resolution, frame rates and compressions. Here we can see that the 17K tops out at 4.3 gigabytes per second in 3:1 constant bitrate and up to 5.1 gigabytes per second in Q0 constant quality, which is mental. So if you record 17K open gate at 60 frames per second in 3:1 compression, you will fill a 8TB module in just 31 minutes. However, thanks to the lower resolutions and greater compression options, you don't need to do this, and you can easily just choose what combination you need and get much longer recording times and lower file sizes. So, as we said at the beginning, the 17K and 12K are very similar, but there are some subtle differences. Of course, the biggest difference is the sensors they use, but the 12K has built-in NDs, whereas the 17K does not. The 17K is approximately 0.7 centimeters longer and about 236 grams heavier than the 12K body. Otherwise, they're incredibly similar and share loads of features. Again, if you want to learn more about these cameras, please check out our full Cine 12K review. Link to that is down below. I hope this video has helped you understand more about this camera and why you may want to grab one for yourself, or more likely, rent one for your next project. The 17K offers an image unlike anything at its price currently. There are only a few digital Cine cameras that have sensors similar in size to this. Arri's Alexa 65 and 265, which are obviously the industry standard for 65mm, but are rental only. The Fujifilm GFX 100 II and the upcoming Eterna. However, their sensors will result in a slightly different look and feel to the wider ones in the 17K and Arri 65 cameras. The 17K is available as 3 different versions: the body only, the regular bundle, and then the EVF bundle. These start at just over £20,000 for the body only, and then just under £29,000 for the EVF bundle. And this is what you get in each of those bundles. I'm really hoping this camera and the Eterna give people the option to shoot with 65mm if you desire that look. And thanks to the reasonable price, I think it should make it not only purchasable for some people, but also affordable to rent. The big challenge currently is affordable lensing, but I think we'll see more and more lenses that can cover this sensor coming out over the next year. Anyway, let us know what you think of the 17K, and if you have any further questions about it in the comments below. And if you like the video, please give it a like, and maybe consider subscribing so you don't miss out on our awesome upcoming content. And thank you so much for watching.